I have to do the double hot rod pose. Bob and I are both rocking Roddy Piper t-shirts. Happy birthday, Hot Rod. We celebrate you and your legend today, April 17th. We lost the Hot Rod 9 years ago, and I've thought about him often ever since. Now, I was a huge fan of Piper. You too, but you got the pleasure of having some actual face-to-face experience with hot rods. So we're doing what Piper used to do. He shared a story one time on a shoot interview about they wanted to lay out the match. I think it was with DDP, obviously write it all out and script everything. So Roddy, you'll open the curtain with your hands and then you will take two, like, and Piper was like, we'll call it in the ring. So we're calling this in the ring right now. We've got a couple of memories we'd like to bring up, but nothing really scripted here. And we want to hear everyone in the live chat. Hi there, diverse diversions. We're all feeling rowdy today. If I had a bunch of hair sticking out, I'd be messing it up. I know he used to hate being impersonated. But Bob, you got one of the coolest stories I ever heard about Hot Rod, and I've heard it a few times, but luckily my memory is going, so I don't quite remember it as clearly. So I love hearing you say it. So why don't you kick it off with your Piper story?
Thanks, Mike. I'll take it away.
What was your name again? Cowboy Bob Hansen. Nice to meet you.
It was the closest I could do to be Roddy related with the name Bob, so I went for it. Actually, it's been a few years since I told this on your channel. I think the first time I ever told it, we were on one of your, I was a Patreon-only roundtable of some sort. But anyway, I'm a stand-up comedian, and I was at the time. This is November 2010. I was doing stand-up comedy at the Comedy Store La Jolla, 916 Pearl Street. Don't park at Vaughn's. And we had found out months in advance that Roddy Piper was coming to do some stand-up. And at the time, he'd been up at the Comedy Store, the Hollywood one, the main one. And I mean, wrestlers were doing stand-up, but they were pretty much, they're telling stories. It just happens to be on a stage where stand-up comedy happens. It wasn't really like, here's Piper's playing jokes about the airport. Like, no, it wasn't. It's Roddy sitting down, as a lot of wrestlers were. Mick Foley famously did it. And now you're going to hear sirens in the background because we're getting rowdy.
Well, it's in honor of the Hot Rod. That was a familiar sound whenever he was around.
Exactly. We're calling it in the ring. Whatever goes. We're talking about the Hot Rod here. And because I was a door guy at the Comedy Store La Jolla, they knew I had a wrestling background. I'm an old ex-retired, former failed, whatever indie wrestler you want to call me.
You're bloodline adjacent, though. Remember,
I am. I'm a student of Off of the Wild Samoan. That is correct. So they knew, like, hey, you got to put Bob on this show. Whatever you do, you just got to put. And I did. I need to mention his very funny comedian, Steve Simone, who was a great friend, who became a real life, family friend of Hot Rod's, who brought Roddy Piper down, and Steve Simone had organized this whole thing, and Roddy absolutely loved him. And Roddy was known to just be late night at the Hollywood Comedy Store. You'd see him, they said, sometimes 1, 2 in the morning, just playing a piano by himself when the people went home.
Really?
Yeah. And this was again, there's 2 comedy stores, a big one in Hollywood, a smaller one in San Diego. And this is the bigger one in Hollywood, but it was just something that he had just been hanging out there for a few months, just being Hot Rod. And he tickled the ivories. So we knew Piper was coming down to tell stories. It was a Thursday night. And right before I go up, we have this green room, which is a closet. It's like a 8x8, room, green room. And I was brought in. Steve Simone said, hey, come in, meet Roddy Piper. I said, well, okay. Ooh, this is weird. And because it's just me and him in the room for a minute. And Piper, I said something. I was very sheepish, and I said hi. And, I was excited. I mentioned I was trained by Alpha a long time ago. And he got all excited, and he told me a story about helping of course, he's the hero in the story, helping the Tonga kid. I almost said Tama Tonga, but that's somebody new. Helping the Tonga kid in the mid or late 80s in West Virginia out of a jam with some locals and fighting him off. But then anyway, I was doing a cold open. There's no host. It's just the show starts when I walk on stage. So someone had popped in, tapped me on the shoulder, Bob, get up there. just do 10 minutes. Nothing to write home about. I do 10 minutes. I know these are wrestling fans. I know they're going to like me. This is, I don't want to say a day off, but this is, it's in my favor. Even if it's a cold open, which is tight, it's still in my favor. I go up. I'd be Bob. I jump around a bit, Bob stuff, and very happy. Did great. I get off stage, and Steve, he taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Hey, go back in the green room. Roddy Piper wants to speak with you." Now, I don't know if you've ever heard the words in your life, or how many people have heard the words, "Roddy Piper would like a word with you." But that was daunting. So I go in there, and I'm like, well, I wonder how this is going to go. But get in there quickly and then figure it out. And Piper, and forgive the lame impression, but Piper says, "Well, that was you on stage. It was the same Bob." I go, "Huh, that was me. I just, after I said hi to you, I just told the jokes. I hope everything went well." And he goes, I was telling Steve, I was slapping him on the back. I was saying, "Is that the same guy? That's not the same shy kid that came in here just a couple of minutes ago. You go up there. Yours was telling the jokes. You were making the hot rod." I don't know.
Was he doing like the head shake and and that voice getting?
Yeah, it's banana. I don't think he had longish hair at the time. This is 2010. I don't really recall, but
still the head shake.
He's animated. Yeah, exactly. He's animated, and he wasn't animated minutes before, because the night before, his son had driven him in, and we saw him, myself and the other comedians, we saw him like 20 feet away, just sleeping in the car while his son came in to do whatever business needed to be done. And we're like, "God, it's Roddy Piper sleeping in the car. This is crazy." But Piper's going off, and I do hate stories where I look good, and here's where I was awesome, but there's no other way to on this one to tell it.
Sometimes, rarely he would do the job for someone who is worthy. So don't feel bad about that. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. That clip you just sent me of the match with Perfect.
Okay, well, we were clearly not. He and I are clearly not in the same business. I don't think he was too threatened, but he said, "I just want you to know. I just want you to know, man. You just got to keep doing it. You just got to keep going, no matter what. I don't care what anybody says. You made me laugh so funny. I was laughing, yada yada yada." And I thanked him very much. And then, even as a young comedian, I knew there's a pause where the headliner or the feature act is done talking to you, and there's a bit of a pause. And I said, "Thanks so much." I shook his hand again. You have a great show. I'm around the corner if you need anything. Appreciate you, Mr. Piper. And he learns your name. I need to mention this. He learns your name for the night, Bob. For that night, you're not just the guy.
How could he forget that name? That name was near and dear to him.
Near and dear to him. And don't forget, Uncle Bob was the Sarge.
I love his bodyguard.
And Sergeant Slaughter was Uncle Bob to his kids.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
So there's and his at the time, his son Colt was 23. His son Colt was with him and really did a lot of go-betweens for us to talk with Roddy. But throughout the show, it's 120 something people on a Thursday. Whatever money Roddy made, I don't know, but I think he spent most of it. He bought pizza for the audience, and myself and the door guys, 8 other guys, were just handing out pizza. Well, on a Thursday, Roddy Piper he's basically just taking requests. People yell out a name. Iron Sheik was one. Owen Hart was another. People just yelling out requests, and he would just tell you something about him and make fun of him and mess with you. And I think the hour he was going to be up there for was about an hour and 40 something minutes, I'm sure. And it was just one of those, because he's not a traditional stand-up comedian. He doesn't know they're giving him the light. Like I even said to the door guys, I'm like, he doesn't know what the light means, right? He's not, well, everyone who comes by, like, no. You should have had the conversation beforehand, or it doesned matter. It can be informal. Someone can just kind of wave at him and he'll figure whatever. I don't remember exactly how that went, but that night he learns your name, and I ended up getting a picture with him, and it was just cool. For that night, you were friends with the Hot Rod, and that if you knew him, if I had seen him again a few weeks later, then yeah, he would have remembered me. But then, that was the one and only meeting that I had with the Hot Rod. But there are days, at the risk of being sentimental early, I was going to save this for the end, but there are days in stand-up comedy where you're going, these gatekeepers, as we call them, bookers, managers, club owners, yada, yada, they like these type of people and not me, and this type and their friends and not me, and blah, blah, blah. And then I remind myself, all these people with clipboards who are not fun, not funny, not interesting, who you don't want to talk to, who the public doesn't want to see, who are not on board with Bob, You know who was on board with Bob? The Hot Rod. So they can stick it because anytime is, I don't know about that Bob guy. He's in his 40s or fucking, he's kind of lame, he's kind of corny. Like, you know who told me to stay? Roddy Piper did. So you have an argument.
The man from Saskatoon. The dude was a fighter from start to finish, and I spent the day rewatching a couple of. Thanks for sharing that story again, though. Like,
it's my pleasure.
I love it. I love it. Before I start yapping, let's just go through a couple comments here. J.R. Ewing, Roddy was the man back in the day. They Live was one of my all-time favorite movies when I was a kid. Turns out that's a documentary now. It's not just a movie. Wow. Roddy used to always say when they'd ask him in the later years, like just before his passing, they ask him about They Live, and he goes, that's a documentary. It's not a movie anymore. It's a documentary. Yeah. Thank you for honoring him tonight. Our pleasure, and thanks for joining us. Audie, good morning. 9 a.m. in Perth. Going to be a long coffee break. Badger Wolf Prime, hello there. Happy birthday to the greatest on my personal Mount Rushmore of wrestling. He doesn't get brought up a lot when people talk about that Mount Rushmore. Always Austin, Hogan, Flair, Rock. Why is the Hot Rod often overlooked when he's got to be one of the top? I mean, a lot of people would say best talker ever, but top 3?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I thought this might come up. I think something with Roddy, he's one of those wrestlers more so than most. He's more about the moments and not the matches.
Yeah.
Other than Bret Hart at Mania 8 and a few others, we don't really think of like the banger, as they'd say today. We don't really think of we think of the Piper, the moments, the
emotion.
The emotion. How did the big fight feel he brought? And then the fight wasn't supposed to be pretty. It wasn't supposed to be a masterpiece in many ways. He was about the moments. He was about the snook of the coconut, the fire extinguisher, and Morty. Well, maybe not the fire extinguisher one.
The chair at Mr. T. Fight!
Cindy Lauper, which I know is busting a record on Lou Albano's head, or when he drove the white Bronco. Never mind that. But the point is, it's about the moment. So I think
the flower shop. The flower shop is one of my favorite.
The flower shop's great. But the influence, I think more so than the Mount Rushmore thing, I think the influence he had is the legacy. I'm jumping way towards something you would say at the end of one of these, but
you got a good point there. Mount Rushmore sure carved those 4 names: the Undertaker, Hogan, whoever, Flair. And when I'm thinking of my Rushmore, I never think of superstar Billy Graham ever, but a lot of the greats, majority of the greats, took something from superstar. And so kind of Piper is the same way. Like the greats took something from him. Look at CM Punk. I mean, CM Punk he's always talking about Piper. Piper was a huge influence on him. So it's almost like you got your 4 faces on Mount Rushmore, but then the whole mountain is made up. I thought like the whole mountain should look like Superstar and then 4 faces on his forehead. But maybe it's Superstar and Roddy side by side.
Yeah, and I want to shove Dusty Rhodes in there too. I mean, that's the thing. We could do this. Who's holding up the mountain? Well, Roddy is one of the guys holding up the mountain. You could argue for Billy Graham's one, Dusty Rhodes is one, Terry Funk is one, Harley Race is one.
Yeah, and the guys who never get brought up, but the faces on Mount Rushmore wouldn't be there without those guys.
Right. Who's holding that mountain up? I think you would have. Some guys are just bigger than the mountain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, bigger than the mountain. Optics Prime, welcome. He says he was great in the Highlander show. I totally forgot about that.
I never seen it.
There was a Highlander TV show, and naturally the Hot Rod was in it. I enjoyed some of his straight-to-video movies, too. I rented them all back in the day. Back in Action was one of my favorites. I bought a copy of it with Billy Blanks, and I watched that one over and over, wore it out, because he's just hilarious in it. It's like Buddy Cop, or he's like a PI or something, but fantastic movie. So it's not just They Live was his only good movie. He actually made a couple that were maybe the movie wasn't fantastic, but he was fantastic in it. Just so much charisma. Big Bong Toys, welcome there, channel member. Greetings from Kentucky. Thanks for joining. Amp says, I loved his podcast, was listening to it every week. Then the following week he died, featuring Inappropriate Earl. I used to love how Earl would just crack Roddy up all the time, just totally mess him up and throw him off, and Roddy would just start laughing. I love you. Oh.
I don't think I ever listened to Roddy's podcast, unfortunately.
The pit, he could never decide on what to call it because it was
that makes sense.
Every intro he'd be like, "Welcome to the Piper's Pit podcast, pit podcast," and he'd always like, "What do we do? What do we call this? Pit pod pit."
Call it the hot pod and just get on with it.
The hot pod, that would have worked too.
But it's right there. I'm good at naming things.
But
it's
he
right
had
there.
But he had a comedian, I think, right there in your area. I think he's in Cali as well, and named Inappropriate Earl. And Earl is just great dry humor, and as his nickname would imply, he's sometimes very inappropriate, but he's just so it's like Stephen Wright kind of delivery, right? Like there's no real malice to anything he says, and it's just like an old school type of comedian.
You would need that to compliment. You would need a very dry, subtle humor guy just to compliment Piper, because you can't have two people off the wall.
It's Brett and Anvil, right?
Yes.
It's Hawk and Animal. Oh wait, that's Robert and Ricky, Rock and Roll Express.
Robert and Ricky. It's Gorilla and Bobby.
Stan and Bobby. Wait, that's
different.
We're talking about Roddy Piper here. Greatest heel of all time. Is he? I think he is.
He's got to be in one of the maybe the most influential heel, one of the most copied, and I think the branches of what Roddy started and the influence he had on a big global scale spread out so much farther than his actual in-ring career.
Because he kept disappearing too.
Yeah,
that's the thing about him. He'd take off, and in his later years when he would do these shoot interviews, he'd be asked about that, and he's got a great point. He's like, you cannot just stick around forever. And no offense to any wrestlers that do this, that congratulations on a 10 or 15-year contract or a 20-year run. But Piper said, that wasn't for him, that he could only remain special if he kept moving. So peak of his career, one of the most popular wrestlers in 87, I'm leaving, goodbye. And he goes and he tries out Hollywood, and he makes a fantastic movie. Got lucky that he hooked up with John Carpenter and they gelled perfectly. But Piper later said, like, Hollywood it wasn't for him, just because he's, I think, too real. Hollywood is a lot about the performance on screen and off screen as well. You could call it the politics, just like in wrestling, right? In front of the camera as well as away from the camera. And Hot Rod just seemed like he was way too real to do the dance to get very far in Hollywood.
Roddy Piper is not going to walk down a red carpet in whatever suit and do the fluffy soundbite for whatever microphone is in his face at the time. And this is on more of the wrestling side, because I know this is a discussion fans love to have, and sometimes ad nauseum for some of their favorite wrestlers. Why wasn't he the WWF champion? Okay.
Didn't want it.
It would have been a disaster. Can you see the logistics of Roddy Piper committing? Roddy Piper's going to commit to a couple at the time, like probably like a 1 or 2 year, like implied, like you're going to be on the road at all these events, house shows and whatnot for all of 1988 or whatever, 89, whatever year it might. No, that would have never worked. Are you going to when Roddy Piper decides, I don't feel like going on Good Morning America today, and just doesn't go, or Arsenio Hall, if you want to go 90, 91, like that would have been a nightmare for the company. I was thinking earlier today, kind of like Andre. Piper was an attraction. Oh my God, now Piper's here. Stuff's going to get bananas. Stuff's going to get out of control. Andre's an immovable object. Piper's an irresistible force, if you want me to put them together. Like Piper's an attraction. And plus the timing, I mean, with Hulkamania and everything else, and then Savage and Warrior later on having these stints, what time would have been good for Piper in theory to be the champion? Well, no time, honestly. It just wasn't. It didn't matter. He probably didn't want it. Didn't need it. It just would have been some. All of our favorites can't be the. I wish Mr. Perfect had it at one point, but I can't. There was just no. Well, you could argue there wasn't a good time for Mr. Perfect, different conversation, but yeah, there's no good time for Piper to have it.
It could be argued that, it was a different time, so not everyone needed it. Jake definitely never needed it.
No.
But then at the same time, I go back to the 70s, and Superstar absolutely needed that belt. And then as soon as he lost that belt, a lot of the luster was gone. So you had your guys who basically they needed the shiny chrome bumper. And that was Superstar. That was Hulk Hogan. That was the Ultimate Warrior. Randy Savage, definitely. It seems like the really flashy, colorful guys like Superstar, Hogan, Macho, they needed that because they needed something like a physical representation of their persona. And Roddy Piper was like, he's bigger than Mount Rushmore. He's bigger than that belt. It's like when he had the Intercontinental, this guy right here, the Intercontinental title. That was a really cool moment where he won that belt and he had that basically that thank you run where he finally got a belt, but walking around with it and bless him, he treated it like it was something precious. He didn't drag it like some world champions would drag their belt. He carried it with true honor, and he seemed like he really, really valued it and appreciated it. But he didn't need it. It still looked awkward every time we saw him with it.
I'm glad you mentioned that run. I know I'm skipping ahead, of course, which is the only way to do it with Roddy Piper.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's no chronological. It's whatever, be here for 90 days anyway. But when Roddy Piper, that was barely a 3-month run, if anything else, because it was just Rumble to Mania to get it to Brett. The idea was, okay, Roddy Piper has it. Here's a feel-good moment for Piper to, I think he beat the Mountie in a few minutes and wasn't much of a match, if my memory serves. And because it's Piper, Brett winning it back from Piper meant 90 times more than it would be if Brett just beat the Mountie back for it. Yeah. It didn't matter, and no offense,
or even Perfect. Brett did beat Perfect for his first reign.
Yeah, that was huge.
But I think beating Piper meant a lot more because it was one of those 4 pinfall losses he ever took in his WWF days.
Exactly. It meant so much more, and we could get into the way Piper did it in that match and everything else. But during that weird 3-month period, I watched something so strange on MSG. I've never actually seen this match, and I had to just look around. It was a weird late February, maybe early March tag team match in Madison Square Garden. The tag team of Ric Flair and Sid Justice versus Roddy Piper and Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, I've seen that one.
And as a suburban New York kids, we would get these MSG house shows broadcast. And anyways, I didn't realize we were spoiled. Sometimes when fans go back and they say, oh, this feud in 89, 88, 90 didn't have a blow off on a pay-per-view. Well, the pay-per-views aren't the best representation. Like a lot of those feuds, like Piper and Rude, for example, were blown off at Madison Square Garden on those house shows.
In the cage.
Yeah, in the cage. That specifically that's an example. Jake and Rick Rude too, but we're staying on Piper.
True.
So that's when that would happen. So I watched this match, and that was Piper had the Intercontinental Championship, like you mentioned. The match got cut off. It had to have been a DQ finish because who's taking the pin a month before Mania, and that wouldn't make any sense.
Oh, I'll do it. I'll lay down for Sid.
I don't think that happened.
After a power bomb.
It got cut off at the end. I'm sure there was just some kind of heels get DQ'd and then they get bumped and powdered out, or who cares? But
so Hot Rod didn't take a power bomb.
I know.
Can you imagine what that would have been like?
Piper and Sid only lock up. Most of the match is really just Piper and Flair. Let's be honest.
I could see Piper down there and Sid setting up for the power bomb, and Piper just going poke.
There was a weird moment with Piper and Sid where Sid's laying down, and first Sid does a headlock takedown to Roddy Piper, which is so out of place for a 300-something pound muscled up monster.
Yeah.
I don't think Sid didn't know what to do. And Piper gets up and he's doing this weird thing where he's punching Sid, but then he's punching Sid on every part of his body, kind of like the Garvin stomp, but he's punching his face and then his shoulder, then his arm, his chest, his stomach, and his leg. And
Yeah.
And then Piper covers him, and on 2, Sid does a huge push-up, and Piper flies way higher in the air than I think Piper could have flied via his own propulsion, if you get the point. Piper flew way in the air. And then, who knows, I think there was some hot tag, but it got me thinking, Roddy Piper as a tag in any tag team match pretty much didn't work. But Roddy Piper in a Survivor Series tag team, to me, did work, if that makes sense. Because a Survivor Series is one big, okay, last resort, let me get my troops together and go to war. Whereas Piper just regularly in a tag team with anybody.
There's no stakes.
It doesn't work. But Piper's like, okay, just this once, I'm getting my crazy friends, and we're all going to... That kind of works.
He kind of... He wasn't in too many of those, but I always got the sense that his team were like the Band of Brothers, you know, in a war, and every elimination was a death. It wasn't just, we lost. But he always took it way more seriously. I never really thought about that, but that's true. He always took it way more seriously than any other Survivor Series member.
And you knew it was a one-off, too. That's the thing. It's like, I found this by accident, but I remember thinking, oh my God, Hogan and Piper tag teaming in MSG for the first time in 92. And then just a simple YouTube search. In 87 and late 86, there's tons of Hogan and Piper tags against everybody. There's one in Philadelphia. They fight Paul Orndorff and Kamala.
I guess they buried the hatchet. But I liked the first times they tagged in 87 because Piper wouldn't let go of the whole, well, you expect me to just ignore that we were mortal enemies for the last 2-3 years? So I remember seeing some matches where they tagged in 86, 87.
Okay.
Yeah, 86, 87. And there's the well-known one where Piper calls a fan up because, what was it? There was a Piper's Pit or some kind of interview segment, and they ask Orndorff, who's going to be your, or they ask Bobby, who's going to be Orndorff's partner, and Bobby says, Harley Race, the king. And so Piper goes, okay, one moment. And he calls up Vladimir, just some fan, but it's Vladimir out of the crowd. He's like, I got to talk to my manager.
I know this. Okay.
Who do you want to be my tag team partner? And Vladimir says, Hulk Hogan. And Piper throws the mic and walks right out. So when they team, I remember seeing this match on like a super tape or one of those compilation VHS tapes way back. But Piper and Hogan were wrestling, and they gave each other the most cold, like cold shoulder, icy tags. You know, it was like Hogan put his hand out and Piper stare at him, and just like, and you could feel the chill, like, I hate you, but you're my partner for the night.
Well, that is the difference between working and wrestling.
Right. And they won the match. But what I loved about that tag match was that the heels started ganging up on Hogan, and Piper left him. Piper left him. Yeah, like babyface, good guy at this point, Piper left him. Didn't save him. And I mean, there's, I'm sure they did the match several times, and one of them ended with Piper saving him in a handshake. But this must have been right at the beginning of like Piper first returning in 86. And he just left him. And I thought, that's incredible. He ditched the champ.
Yeah.
He didn't do the typical, like, yeah, let's bury the hatchet, because it meant too much to him. Everything meant too much to him. Like, we've been blood enemies for years. It doesn't make sense for us to bury the hatchet in one night. I still hate you. So even like up until 90 or 92, when they were doing those tag matches against Flair and Justice, it's still kind of, he knows, like, okay, that's ancient history, but still just a little, I don't trust you. Just a little still remained.
My memory serves more so than I guess the match, which I clearly still haven't finished, is in those event center run by Sean Mooney type of things. Mm-hmm. I remember a promo for the match being 12, seeing the two of them on screen together, and they did it. They addressed it, but then moved on, which I think is the best. This is when workers knew how to work. I forget exactly the verbiage, but they basically addressed it like, yep, it's the Garden. We've been to war many times, but that was in the past, and now we got a problem with Ric Flair, Sid Justice, blah, 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 blah. And moving in, you know, in WrestleMania 8, Hogan's got a problem with Sid. Roddy Piper has Bret Hart on the horizon. Mm-hmm. So they addressed it and moved on for 92, which for 92, to me, makes perfect sense. They acknowledge it. For all you scratching your heads going, but why? They said so. Now move on. Mm-hmm. Perfect.
We got some more comments coming in. Boba Wave, hello there. Good evening, Michael and Cowboy. Good to have the hot rod getting some love. Absolutely. And Dale, he says, I still remember meeting Piper at Chicago Comic Con. My father worked for him for 5 minutes. That's awesome, man. Yeah, we want to hear the personal experiences with the hot rod. Optics Prime, Piper held the title vicariously through Bret Hart. That's a cool idea. Like the entire run Bret had with the IC title from WrestleMania to SummerSlam, where he dropped it to Davey. It was kind of like the essence of Piper was still with him. I won this from Roddy. He endorsed me.
Right.
He gave me, Piper went out as Bret was crowned that night. So it would have been not as impactful if Bret won the belt and Piper stuck around. He was actually supposed to do the Piper's Pit again after that. Remember on Superstars, they said, next week Roddy Piper returns with Piper's Pit. I was super excited about that. Yeah, return of Piper's Pit. And then it never happened. And then like a year or two ago, that recently, I found out why it never happened. It was god awful. They taped it. They actually taped it, and Piper winged it. He called it in the ring. I can't remember who the guest was. Something like Jameson, something like that, like or a jobber, maybe trying to recreate the Frankie Williams magic.
Right.
It was awful. Like, I'm telling you, as a huge Piper fan, it was like, ooh, that was awkward. And I think he knew it too, because on his way back, you could kind of tell Piper knew when he was cooking, and he knew when he was not cooking. And his walk back kind of, to me, seemed like, that didn't work. And so I think he just decided it's Bret's time. It's time for me to go on, again, keep on moving. And that's why he disappeared again for a while.
Can we discuss just briefly Roddy Piper on commentary for 90 and 91 for a little bit?
Amazing.
It really was great because Roddy Piper, it sounds like I'm jumping around, but bear with me. For 2 WrestleManias in a row, in 94 and 95, Roddy Piper was randomly a referee for a Bret Hart match.
Mm-hmm.
And in both those occasions, Bret versus Yogo and then Bret versus Bob Backlund, Piper had nothing to do with the issue. It was just randomly Roddy Piper showing up. And usually a special guest referee is related to the issue and enhances, and there's a spot where, in this case, especially in that I Quit match with Backlund, good God, Piper is there to distract. And in WrestleMania 10, oddly enough, why is Roddy Piper there? Why is Burt Reynolds here? Why is anyone here?
Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah, exactly. And nothing made any sense. But Roddy Piper's a referee, not so good. Roddy Piper on commentary, much easier or much harder for Piper to accidentally overshadow everyone because he's not on camera. Obviously, the voice is recognizable. But Piper had some memorable calls, and if there's one thing Piper added to the commentary, and I think if you listen back, if you could hear either Gorilla, mostly Gorilla, but maybe some Vince trying to reel him in here and there, and Gorilla probably did better with it. But Piper had these memorable calls. He was so passionate, and sometimes he would do what old Vince McMahon would do, would just go so bananas and get so lost in it. You could hear Piper in SummerSlam 90 screaming at Rick Rude in the cage match, "Rude, reach through the bars, reach through the bars."
He was riding Warrior the whole time. He was
Warrior's got a big schnugger hanging from his nose. He cracked his face paint on the bars there. But remember, Roddy Piper was commentating with Gorilla Monsoon during the debut of The Undertaker.
Oh, right. He hushed right up when Taker came out.
Piper changed his tone, and there's a couple of calls.
Put him over.
Oh, yeah, he put him over. I mean, they both knew to put him over.
It's almost like Piper was doing the job on commentary, because a lot of the time it was like, I can put you over, but still, I'm still Roddy Piper. And that was a moment where he was like, whoa, what?
Piper was, without saying it, he was hinting at the idea that this Undertaker guy might not necessarily be a guy he wants to fight if he doesn't have to. And when Taker, like I know him, when the Undertaker and Brother Love come out, I remember it was in Hartford, Connecticut, with a crooked aisle. There was a 90-degree in the aisle, which is funny watching the Warrior try to run to it in the match before and almost get killed. But
he should have had one of those like bat hook things and a pole so you could like take the.
He should have been tethered to the corner of that just to not take it on young fans. But
I would have loved to have seen him come out with his Survivor Series team all taped off. That's a reference to greatest wrestling promos, which Bob and I are on different YouTube channel.
Survivor Series 89. But I remember a few instances. There was a gentleman in the audience with a mustache and one earring in the left or right ear, of course. Where else are your ears? And his jaws hanging open.
Could be in the cheek. I mean, we're talking about wrestling, right?
The rubber bands. But the guy, the audience member, this is when they would just focus on an audience member and goof on him, and you would never know until 3 months later when your video store got the pay-per-view and the thing. But Roddy Piper says about the guy with the mustache and the earring hanging out. And I remember Piper, and they took this out, I think, of the Peacock current edition. But Piper goes, "Yeah, Buckaroo, take a look at this fella there." And he called him Buckaroo, and I don't know what he was implying, but but there was a moment the first moment where the Undertaker takes off his hat and you see the purple makeup, and Piper says something like, "Yeah, he don't get much sleep, this fella. Maybe switch to decaf or something like that." And he's going on, and when Taker,
which is funny coming from him,
right? Maybe got a little night eye there, a little shut eye there. He don't look, and I remember this line, he don't look friendly at all. And Taker takes out Coco, and he does a short spot with Brett. And Undertaker reaches back, tags Honky or Valentine or one of them. And Piper says, "Oh, I don't want to play no more, don't you? You just take your ball and go home." He got excited, he tagged. I remember that line. He got excited. He tagged, and all those lines of Piper just commenting on his first bewilderment of the Undertaker. I don't think that never gets mentioned. It's always DiBiase introduces him and all that stuff. But
I think that's
a long ramble, but worth noting.
I think he was really cheering for Dream's team too, and that's one of the ones I remember. He was because it was Brett and DiBiase in the end there. Mm-hmm. Which was strange because Brett wasn't Brett at that point. Brett was half of the Hart Foundation. He was a tag team champion at the time, but that's not how they used to book the Survivor Series matches. It would be DiBiase, the captain, against the Dream, the captain of his team. It's like, why is this tag team guy in the finals? It doesn't make any sense. And Piper was cheering his heart out, cheering Brett on. "Come on, Brett, do it, Brett." And it didn't come off as like, "Hey, you're not impartial here, Hot Rod." It really felt like he was, as much as he built the Undertaker during the intro, he was building Brett at that moment too, saying this isn't just a tag team guy. He can do it. He can do it.
Yeah. Well, do you remember at the beginning of that match, Roddy Piper briefly mentions, and this is the days where they didn't have a graphic for everything. He mentioned, I think it was Dean, the brother.
Dean Hart passed away.
So he mentioned Dean Hart passed away. So Piper takes a second to mention that, and then my dog is drinking loudly. I don't know if you could hear that. Chloe, she has a drinking problem.
In honor of Roddy Piper, let's everyone have a sip of something.
So I found the water as well. My dogs and I both drink the same thing, room temperature water, all day long.
Do you have a promo code for that?
If you have the promo code Bob Squad, you get nothing.
Nothing happens.
Absolutely nothing. So Piper had established in the beginning of that match why means so much to Brett. And to your point, during the match when Taker takes out Coco, and Taker took out Coco and the American Dream Dusty Rhodes in that match in his debut. He takes out half the opposing team, one of which is the captain, who's Dusty Rhodes, which is crazy if you're looking back. And I remember
the Dream though. The Dream said, "I'll give you a cano, kid." I ain't laying down for you just yet.
No, Dream got pinned. Dream got pinned in that.
I thought it was a countout. It was
Taker got pinned. What happened after? Taker.
I think it was a double
tombstone to Dream. He does an elbow, like a forearm, like bouncing, just standing on the top rope for just a second. Does that, pins Dream. Brother Love is putting the boots to Dusty. And while Taker's in there with probably Brett, because I think Brett was the last one left, Taker goes out and then he brawls with Dusty and Taker gets countered out. as Bret is left with Valentine and Ted DiBiase, I want to say.
Yeah. So that makes this past WrestleMania very interesting that The Undertaker, whose debut was pinning Cody's father, The Undertaker shows up to save Cody and finish the story. Interesting.
That's right.
And it all comes back to Hot Rod.
Back to Hot Rod somehow.
Let's say it does.
Well, now, hang on. That pay-per-view, that night 2 of that same WrestleMania, did start with Roddy Piper's music, did it not?
Ah, that's right. Scotland the Brave.
We got a Punk called the sacrilege. Sorry.
We got a couple more comments to go through. Figure and Dan, welcome. Piper was always one of my favorite wrestlers. When he was good, he was very good. But when he was bad, he was even better. Not all his movies were hits, but Body Slam and They Live were awesome. That was one of his great sayings. Another one of my favorite Piperisms was, "You do not throw rocks at a man who has a machine gun." Piper finally made it as IC champ, but he should have got one run as world champion. It would have been nice, but he, like we said before, not totally necessary. Dale says you could say the same with him in the NWA and WCW. Piper as the United States champion. True, yeah, he had the US title in WCW, and it was like, okay, that's a belt on a belt.
Did he not, forgive me, so he did not have the WCW world. I think he shows up in '96. He beats Hogan in the non-title, if my memory.
It turned out it was non-title the moment he beat Hogan. We found out it was actually because he put him out with a sleeper hold, and like I remember watching that match and going, he's the world champion. I think even one of the commentators, it might have been Shivani, who was like, Piper's won the world title, something like that. And it turned out, no, never mind. It's non-title.
Communication is key, folks.
Why? It's a Starrcade main event. Why wouldn't it be for the title? But
why are you telling us after the finish?
Who knows? That's WCW for you. Piper versus Hollywood Hogan equals NWO versus WCW was not good. If booked right, Piper would have taken the world title from Hulk, and Hogan would have moved on to split the NWO. That would have been the time to do it, I think. You mentioned earlier when would have been the time to give Piper a world title. Instead of Sting, I don't know. I still feel like Sting was the man to take the title, but instead of Luger, give Piper the short run, and then Piper wins it back.
Yeah, that week that Luger had it, so just so there would be a title change on pay-per-view or whatever.
Although it's still nice that Luger got an official at least a week with the big gold belt he had been chasing forever. So that's still fair. Nice. Yeah.
Hindsight's tricky like that.
Good to see you, Clown Man. That nickname you gave me is starting to catch on. Double M.
Oh, Double M. Look at that. Look at me go.
Got to start talking like Arn Anderson if people are going to call me Double M. Stop a butthole in you. Badger Wolf Prime says Piper and Orndorff were great together. I love that tag team.
Paul Orndorff's kids run Paul Orndorff's Twitter right now, and they're always sharing cool stuff. If you find that worth mentioning.
Yeah. Lex winning the belt was great, but WCW dropped the story next week like a rock. Yeah, absolutely. And man, we got a lot more comments here. Thanks everyone for chipping in some Piper thoughts. If only one of Piper's boys were in WWE right now. Cole did some MMA. I don't think he's doing any wrestling, but Piper's daughter is wrestling now.
Is she?
Yeah, yeah, she is. She is. Teal Piper. So she's been on AEW a couple of times, I think. And I remember her.
Okay, well, things will get better.
Ariel Teal, and she shared this story. She's with a guy that Roddy trained. So Roddy didn't train her. Roddy trained her husband or boyfriend, whatever their relationship is at the moment, and he trained her. So he passed on to her what Roddy passed on to him. So that's just really, really poetic.
Huh. Good
memories of Piper. Remember when he broke a coconut on Superflex, and he never was the same after that. Our mutual gym teacher, Mr. Lewick, was quite fond of him. Football and Greco-Roman wrestling was obviously his forte. I was more in scuba and badminton. You understand? Piper took over the Goldust storyline for Razor Ramon. That's right. He stepped in when Razor said, I'm heading south. And just when you think you have that's another great one. Just when you think you have all the answers, I change the questions. So in an era of now every wrestler has a catchphrase, Piper did have one that the crowd could recite because it seemed like he came up with a new one every week.
That was the thing. It was they became catchphrases to us, but for him they were one-offs. I think Dusty Rhodes was the same way, if I might.
Hard Times was one promo.
Right. We just keep saying it over and over. Had the Ultimate Warrior did not have a catchphrase.
Feel the power.
Yeah, kind of.
This is more of a logo for merchandise than a promo sign off, though.
I always thought it was funny, like how much yes or yeah has been used. If you think about Randy Savage with "Ooh Yeah," Jim Neidhart with "Yeah Baby," Paul Bearer with "Oh Yes," Daniel Bryan at one point with "Yes," and currently LA Knight with "Yeah." And I'm missing some. That's the thing, but I was a bunch.
Did anyone ever use "Yup"?
I think Kevin Owens jokingly did to mess with Daniel Bryan one week. So yes,
right, the "Yup" movement.
Memory serves. So and like I said Randy Savage. Oh yeah. So yeah, there was a lot of yes and yeses, and I'm sure I'm still missing a few, but there you go.
So you were talking about Piper and the emotion on commentary. I gotta also bring up the Virgil turn. He was such an integral part of that whole Virgil turning on DiBiase, both the turn, just telling him, urging him, do it. This is like a movie level performance that commentators would normally just sit there and go, is he gonna? And Piper's up there going, do it, be a man, stand up for yourself. And then he became part of that whole thing. So he had the WrestleMania moment where he's hitting DiBiase with the crutch. But then when Virgil wins the $1 million belt, which is the perfect conclusion of Virgil's whole story, finishing his story, it wouldn't have been the same without Piper on commentary screaming at Virgil, do it. It wasn't just win the match or win a belt. It was win your manhood.
Right. Piper made it important. If Virgil had beaten Ted DiBiase that night and Roddy Piper was not on commentary, or Roddy Piper was never part of the feud, it would have been cute and fun and happy and clap and feel good, but we wouldn't have been on the edge of our seats. I remember, I think it was like a fake count out, a fake DQ, and then eventually Virgil pins him in that match. And I remember being 11, and it was the heartache of all of that. And remember, Sherry, this didn't last long, but Sherry was managing Ted DiBiase at the time.
Bear.
Exactly. And it was a lot. There was a lot going on there. I think Virgil's year 91 was the year of was Virgil. 91 was Virgil's year, and none of it really happens without Roddy Piper. I believe that originally the plan was just Roddy Piper versus Ted DiBiase at WrestleMania 7, which would have been awesome.
Yeah.
But of course, Roddy Piper, I think it was a motorcycle accident.
So it was legit. I've always wondered if it was a legit injury.
Oh yeah, no, it was some kind of accident where he broke his leg and his hip right before the Rumble 91 or something like that. Because
that's too bad.
Is he not on crutches on commentary in the 91 Rumble?
He on crutches. I'm not. He came down to the ring at WrestleMania with a crutch.
Right. Or maybe it was just because he was on Superstars every week. I mean, they taped, 4 weeks at a time. But maybe it was just the lead from between Rumble and Mania. He was on crutches all the time. And so I can't, I'm not 100% sure Roddy Piper was on crutches at the Rumble. But either way.
That's when he's most dangerous. When he has a crutch, when he has a broken leg, he's at his most dangerous.
But I guess to our own points, we just mentioned that Mania and that SummerSlam and what Roddy Piper added to it. What about the Royal Rumble initial Virgil blowback? They beat Dusty and Dustin just to move on and get that out of the way there and let them move on. But Roddy's freaking out. And Ted DiBiase mentioning Virgil's mother was ill, I guess, or something, or this, whatever. And Piper's just his yes when Virgil finally hits Roddy Piper with the belt. Roddy Piper always told you how important this was, that for humanity, that Virgil stand up to Ted DiBiase.
He could make any match feel good moment, and he was so perfect for movies. It's weird that he never had more success in movies, because he was the most movie feeling thing about pro wrestling for a very long time. Like when I think of the best wrestlers turned actors, I think Roddy Piper is right up there, even though he doesn't really have the portfolio of Dave Bautista and The Rock.
No.
But he's the one that, and then later on, some other wrestlers would come in. I think Dolph Ziggler took some acting lessons. Cody has taken acting lessons, and it really helps with what they do in wrestling. But I think the trailblazer for that is Roddy Piper. He's the one that took the Hollywood mentality and brought it to wrestling really before anyone else did.
Well, that's another example of him holding up that Mount Rushmore, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yet another.
And Neil has it going. We all miss him.
Indeed.
Damn. That's what we all said the day Roddy Piper passed away. Remember Piper sporting the arm in a sling, which he could. I don't remember Piper ever having an arm in a sling, did he?
Who knows? I don't recall.
I do remember Cowboy Bob having the skit on. I think that was TNT. The skit about they were going to check Bob's arm to see why is it taking so long to heal, because it had been like a year or two or something. And Piper is like, yeah, the doctor is going to find it. He's going to tell you it's legit. He's going to tell you. And then the doctor says, this is not making any sense. This should have healed, a long time ago. And Piper's like, he's a quack. He turns out he's a quack.
There's got to be a huge HIPAA violation to do that on television, be that as it may. I watched the War to Settle the Score on MTV from '95, that match with him and the Hulkster.
Is that the one where they charge each other?
Yes.
It's like you can feel the electricity, and they actually charge each other. And instead of a lockup, which is great, right? Flair Steamboat lockup, sure. But yeah, the animosity is like, boom. It was like two magnets going at each other.
In the Garden. This blows my mind. It's only a month, but it's in the Garden a month before the first WrestleMania.
Really?
Yes, it's only a month before. So it's February of '85. So, and I think March 24th so roughly it's a month before. In the same building, mind you. And I think that's what blows what people kind of lose sight of with the Garden is the Garden was everything. Paper. I don't even think WrestleMania was technically pay-per-view. It was closed circuit, whatever it was. I get lost on that kind of stuff. But these two are going to wrestle in a tag team match at WrestleMania. And I remember, like you mentioned, they collide. There's no lockup. They just run into each other. Most of Piper's matches did start off hot. It was a lot of, we just go right away and go. You did have to wrestle. It looks to me like you did have to wrestle Piper's match. And that might be one of the reasons we remember Piper so much for the moments more than some matches where the idea was the fight. It was not supposed to be pretty. We weren't supposed to be gaining stars. We were supposed to, people were screaming at Hulk Hogan versus Roddy Piper like two guys are trying to murder each other. This was commentated by Gorilla Monsoon and Gene Okerlund. And that was fascinating.
And Gene wasn't
right.
That wasn't his thing.
And on paper, it doesn't sound like a very good idea because it wasn't Gene's thing. But then if you watch the match, they don't have a wrestling match. Okerlund and Gorilla are screaming about, and Okerlund was very good here, but again, he doesn't have to call a wrestling match.
He just went, oh!
Yeah, he's screaming about the audacity about Piper's audacity to do bad things. And if Okerlund was great at anything, Okerlund was great at being indignant over dastardly deeds.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Okerlund was on, and he was great on this. There was, of course, there's Cyndi Lauper, then Mr. T runs in, and people are losing their minds. Danny DeVito was in the audience, which is a funny foreshadowing of the Philadelphia. I never saw it, the Sunny Philadelphia, whatever show. But Danny DeVito is in the audience for the War to Settle the Score. It's all full circle. What a spectacle. And I know modern fans would not like this because it was a DQ finish, and modern fans hate non-finishes. Mm-hmm. And I get it. A main event of a WrestleMania probably shouldn't end on a disqualification. And this was a big, big event, and they wanted to see Hogan get the pin. But really, I think this is, if you have basic cable, free on MTV to get you to buy closed circuit WrestleMania, in hindsight.
Good on Piper and I don't hear very many old school wrestling fans really bust his chops for refusing to do the job. Mm-hmm. Other people get their chops busted for refusing to do the job. Like, there's people who go get on Brett's back for not dropping the title to Shawn, but get on Shawn's back for refusing to do the same to Brett. He said he admitted he would, but Piper, no, I'm not losing to this guy, and it just makes sense to so many people. Well, no, he shouldn't, because he's special. I mean, he's not just another villain. He's not like, as great as Orndorff was, he wasn't Orndorff, or he wasn't King Kong Bundy or Big John Stud. Piper was the Joker to Hogan's Batman. Yeah. And so why would you just get beat and tossed out? Like, Piper knew his worth. It wasn't just ego. It was like, look, this is best for business. It sounds egotistical coming from the guy himself, like, look, I'm the best heel you'll ever see. But he's telling the truth. Kind of reminds me, to segue just for a second, Jim Cornette. When Bobby Eaton passed away, Jim Cornette said, "Thank you, Bobby, because when I said I managed the greatest tag team in the world, you made it so that I wasn't a liar." Bobby Eaton was the reason. Well, Roddy Piper, when he was like refusing to job, because I can't, I'm better than any other heel this guy will ever face. He was telling the truth. He was, a dastardly heel who was telling the truth. You can't beat this guy. He's got to be that shifty guy that always escapes by the skin of his teeth. And the thing I really loved about Piper as a heel, now I was like any other kid in the era. I wasn't cheering Piper when he was a heel. I didn't start cheering him until 86 when I was supposed to. But what I always liked about him, and what made it easy to switch over and start cheering him, is that he wasn't your typical cowardly heel. Like, sometimes he would beg off, but more important was the moments where he would stand up, where most heels would run, like against Andre the Giant. Like he would run from Andre, but he would give Andre more disrespect than most heels would, like the famous Piper's Pit, where he's like, lifts him up, and Andre, I think, knocks the set over or something like that. And Piper, like, just, he's got a little more fight in him than most people. And Piper, I saw this shoot interview where he talked about Andre was going to wrestle Piper in Madison Square Garden, and Andre was going to do color. He was going to run the blade. And Vince was, and everyone was saying no. And Andre goes, yes. And they're like, no, Andre, you don't do that for him. And Piper's just sitting there going, what's happening? And Andre is like, yes, I'm doing the blade job for Roddy Piper, because he had that much respect, because Andre, the attraction, recognized this is an attraction. We don't kill this guy off.
Do you recall roughly what year that was, or where they were in their careers?
That had to be 84 or 85.
Okay.
It might have been 84.
I'm trying to wrap my head around, because the second you said Piper versus Andre, the first thing I thought, and I haven't seen the match, the first thing I thought was, what's the finish?
I've seen it before. I can't remember what it is.
How do you, who's laying down for that? I hate this. It might be an unpopular opinion among Hot Rod fans. I think if Piper at one point did take the 1, 2, 3 from Hogan, I actually don't think it would have hurt Roddy Piper's star power one bit. But usually the wrestler, the whole wrestler in me is like, hey, you win them, you lose them. But he did keep himself special. He did do a good job of that. These were different times for anyone who wants to go on about it. In 2024, if Roddy Piper was in his prime, and so was Hulk Hogan, and Piper said, I'm not losing to Hulk Hogan today at WrestleMania, and we're both 35 to 38 years old or whatever, then I would say, yeah, no, Piper's in the wrong. Because things have changed, whether we want to admit it or not. But, maybe I'm contradicting myself. But yeah, I'd say if a few months after Mania.
He took a pinfall to Superfly during their feud. And it didn't kill. Okay. It didn't kill him. Yeah, I was shocked to see that. It was on another one of those.
See, I didn't even know that. See, that's how little it matters. I wasn't even aware that at some point Snuka pinned him.
It was on one of the compilation VHSs, and I was shocked. I'm like, what? 1, 2, 3 clean? Like, what? It was like that perfect match. There's
let's segue into
that. Right before we do that, though, Scott, old friend, says no one has ever gotten the eye poke over. like Roddy Piper. Yeah, here's where is it? Present, share screen. Here we go. This is a very interesting match from November 20th, 1990. So Mr. Perfect, I believe, is the Intercontinental Champion at this point. This is the one you sent me?
Yes, it is. It's tricky because I think Perfect had re-won it from the Texas Tomato, but they didn't air it like for 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm sorry, was that not his name? I'm kidding. But so it might be a weird. I have no idea if Perfect had won the thing back yet because it was like a big gap. I think Perfect actually won it back before the 1990 Survivor Series, which is why in that match Perfect just kind of beats the Texas Tornado just so nonchalantly, I guess, just because they're like, well, if it's over, it's over. So I think there was some goofiness there, but either way,
look at this little weasel. Look at this weasel.
Yeah. Either way, Perfect's a top guy. It doesn't really make a difference, I guess.
The finish of this match is extra peculiar because Perfect is managed by Piper's, like, one of his arch nemesis, Bobby Heenan. But he eats a Perfect Plex and he gets pinned clean. 1, 2, 3. And what's even more bizarre, like the whole time I'm watching this, I'm thinking, was he leaving? Did he leave to film a movie for 4 months? But
it was a house show where the camera was running, I think.
And he sticks his hand out.
Yeah.
And they shake hands.
At that moment, I'm glad you paused it there. At that moment, it's hard to hear, and this is talk about Piper getting something over. You can hear a child's voice when Piper sticks his hand out. You can hear like a 10 or 11-year-old's voice go, he's a real man, because he sticks his hand out. And when Perfect is smirking, you can hear that like 2 seconds before the video cuts out. And talk about getting it over with so much subtleties. That handshake today would take 6 minutes for both guys to go around, and the lights and camera and music, and people got to chant 14 different things and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But that was all in like 30 seconds. And he just got it over, and that was that. And you hear the kid got it because that kid was definitely cheering for Piper, but that kid yells, because he's a real man.
Yeah.
Boom.
That's awesome.
Got it over.
And that was like a hint of Perfect's face turn to come in a few years. So he's talking about the Andre match, count out finish. I just looked up. I didn't find the Madison Square Garden one, but I found one. I think it was the Philadelphia Spectrum, and it's Roddy just leaving. He just so that's the obvious finish to Roddy versus Andre. Like, he just leaves, because that's pretty much what he did at WrestleMania. Even though Orndorff ate the pin, Roddy would do that a lot anyway. He would just take off, and the way he would do it goes back to what I was saying before. Not running like, I don't want to get beat up anymore, but he would like march out. He looked like he was on his way to kick someone else's butt, not like he was running from anything.
He's leaving in a huff.
Leaving in a huff, yeah. Given the
the old 80s finger without the finger, just the fist thing. The yours, if you will. Danhausen, shout out. Yeah.
Neil's got a question for us. You guys think Piper would have won the big belt if he hadn't left for Hollywood in '87? Instead of Macho the following year, maybe.
Now, again, because of the schedule and reliability. I don't mean reliability in a bad way, like probably a good reason Jake Roberts wouldn't have been a good candidate. But
what are you talking about?
But Piper would be a guy who, it's like, is Piper going to want to go in 3 months? Is he going to get bored and want to go away and go to Hollywood? Piper's going to change his mind and doing what he wants to do. That stand-up comedy story I told earlier, Roddy Piper did that for like less than a year. It was just the stars aligned, and he did that for a couple of months in LA, and then did the one time for us in San Diego, and then probably another few time in LA or two. And then that was it. He continued to be friends with that comedian, Steve Simone, that I mentioned. They stayed friends for the next 5 years remainder of Roddy's life. But as far as that was just something Piper was getting a kick out of for a little bit, and then he went to do something else. So you can't put the belt on the guy and be like, hey, you're going to be on a road for 29 days a month for the next 6 months? Probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if you imagine if in 1988 it's Saturday night's main event and we just left that belt on Andre?
Oh.
No, you can't do that. That's fun on paper, but you're going to make Andre the Giant
Well,
travel tour.
he'd be
No.
Roman Reigns 40 years before Roman Reigns, basically.
Yeah.
He'd
But I'm saying,
wrestle every 4
if
months.
you put the belt on Andre in 1988, you're going to make 1988 Andre travel even more. Are you crazy? No, that's
true.
not happening.
I just assumed they would not make him travel, and we would only get
good
2
point.
defenses that year, like Roman Reigns, basically.
Good point. But yeah, but at the demands at the time, Andre's really going to go out of his way to go talk to Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee? No, he's not.
And plus,
Roddy can't be trusted to do it either. I'm sorry.
And plus, Piper as a champion, I think we got what we needed with his Intercontinental run.
Yeah.
He had that very short run, but he held on to the belt not just through force, but through smarts. There's that rematch with the Mountie where he gets the water poured on him.
Shockproof.
Yeah, and he gets shocked with the shock stick, which has no effect on him. Pins the Mountie, and then takes the T-shirt off. He's wearing a shockproof vest.
It says the words. Yeah, I watched it recently.
And then with Brett, he made it clear to Brett like how important that title was to him, and he was ready to revert back to the old hot rod of 84, 85 when he was about to hit him with the ring bell. And when he decided, no, I'm not going to do it that way, he lost the belt. So, like, how many times can you do that if he was world champion? I think you can only do it one time, and then it's like, this again, the conflicted, and you can't really draw that out.
The story is, I guess, the story of the match, and this is in-ring storytelling, which gets lost, is that Roddy Piper lost to Bret Hart because Roddy Piper chose to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And in doing so, he lost, and he accepted his loss, just like shaking Mr. Perfect's hand.
Yep.
Roddy Piper accepted the fact that in a clean, fair, play-by-the-rules wrestling match, Bret Hart did defeat him, and he accepted that. And Roddy stood up, and I did the right thing, and I lost. And then Piper sticks around and uncomfortably puts the entire belt around Bret. They don't show that moment. It's a little awkward. Like, even Bret's doing like, what are you doing? And twists him around. It's a whole, I went too deep. It was sweet, and then I had to go too far, but whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you love that interview with Piper and Bret, and I think it was Okerlund between them before that match took place.
Mm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Was it y'all Mrs. Hart would make them
bologna sandwich?
Yeah.
It was all full of backhanded compliments, and it's like, Bret was okay on promo, but head to head with Roddy, oh dear, like he didn't stand a chance. So yeah, he's just giving him backhanded compliments about you. I love your family. I love your, she's like a mother to me. A little skimped on the salami, on the bologna, only one piece, but whatever. And you're such a good little kid. And then he just kept taking shots at Bret, and it took him forever to. What was it, the potty training or something?
Yeah, of course, you were just being potty trained. Of course, I was told you were 5 or something of that nature. And Bret, though, even though, of course, obviously on the microphone, Bret is not matching Roddy Piper, but Bret was a cowboy. Bret was, softly spoken and stoic anyway, so it made sense for Bret to stare down. And Bret's facial expressions were more important than his words of him going, okay, Roddy, I respect you. I know what you're doing. And Bret had that expression. I know what you're doing. You're buttering me up, Hart family, mom, and then I know you're giving me a backhanded compliment. And then they do that little tug of war. I would have had you. No, bye-bye. I don't know what Piper was doing there.
He had his belt, like his kilt belt wrapped around his fist, right?
Yeah, I think so. I believe it.
He hid the kilt belt with a big chrome buckle in the Intercontinental title. So that's what he's doing. That's why he's sticking his hand in the Intercontinental title. So when he leaves and Bret pulls them around, Piper's got the belt. So Bret's like, I could have had you. You turned your back on me. And Piper was like, no.
Yeah.
No, you didn't, because I had this already. Like, the heel is in here and he's just dying to come out. Don't mess with me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So
That's
it was the
just
belt because he would use that as a heel, right? He whipped Mr. T with the old belt. It's not just like I'm going to blast you with a belt buckle, but this is an actual symbol of one of his most heinous acts as a heel when he was whipping Mr. T with Bob Orton helping
he's
him.
reminding Bret Hart, I'm Roddy Piper.
That's right. Remember this? You remember how bad I can get? Don't poke the bear. Got to talk about this. Jesse Ventura went into acting, but did a better than Piper as an actor. Could have done at least one film together. No, they were in a show together, at least a pilot. They did a pilot episode of a show called Tag Team.
Right.
So it's not great, but this is what Jesse means when he's commentating at WrestleMania 6 and Piper comes down and Jesse goes, "It's my tag team partner." I never understood what that meant until YouTube came around.
Right.
And this pilot is on YouTube. So Jesse Ventura and Roddy Piper in a pilot episode of two wrestlers who become cops. And this is this is so perfect. I love this idea so much. And a couple of my buddies, one of them's in the live chat, we got together some years back. Don't ask to see it. It is buried. It is buried in the vault somewhere. But we got together many years ago, and we filmed our own pilot episode called Tag Team, and we did it all up, like with aged it to make it look like it was from the 70s, so that this tag team was a remake of our reboot.
Okay.
And our idea was that we were wrestlers in Japan, and our bills had become astronomical because of alimony payments and assaulting lawyers and judges, at the alimony hearings. Right. And so in order to make ends meet, because the wrestling isn't paying the bills, we were forced to become cops. Like we didn't have any choice. It was almost like an edict. You have to be cops. And we're like, no, man, cops hate us. And it's like this, basically. We tried to capture the cheese of tag team in this tag team pilot. And we had a blast because it was all wrestling moves, right? Like going after perpetrators and power bombing them and all this stuff. And we made up like fake wrestling names like Ole E. Cornette and Marty Michaels and Sean Giannetti. But that inspired one of the little short films that I did, Tag Team.
Oh, man. Yeah, I'm not usually into remakes and reboots and this, that, and the other thing. But if someone tried Tag Team again, I'd be cool with that.
Piper and Ventura doing Police Academy before it was a cool idea. And the great thing about Tag Team is they actually do some wrestling. I think there's a moment in the pilot where they tag. Like there's a fight with bad guys in a park or something. There's a tree there, and they tag because they're a tag team, right? And they're doing clotheslines and stuff. So in the thing that we did, me and my buds, my partner is getting beat up by all the bad guys, and I'm on the other side of a fence. And I'm like leaning over and I won't help him, like totally inspired by this show. Like I won't help him until he tags, and he finally like stuns the guy, leaps, does the hot tag. Yes. And then I go over the fence with a nightstick and just beat everyone up. But I don't do it until he tags me, because that's the rules of Tag Team. And we were
right.
Basically,
even though a nightstick wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah.
I think John Cena and Batista could do it.
John Cena and Batista.
Because Rock wouldn't do it. But I think Cena and Batista, I don't know if they get along or whatever. I have no idea. But I'm just saying on paper, I could see, I'd like to see, they'd be older cops for sure, but why not? Okay, I'm glad you brought up Body Slam.
Body Slam.
Because a lot of my mentors and the Samoans are in Body Slam with Dirk Benedict and Roddy Piper. Am I correct on that?
The Face Man, yeah.
Yeah. I haven't seen it in forever, and I would really love to rewatch it. I say that now, and then I start, and then I regret that. I'm sure.
I had that exact same feeling when we did that Delta Force 2 commentary.
Oh, God.
I would love to do this, and then I spent half the movie 3/4 of the movie apologizing to you.
When you and I did and Roddy Piper's in this, so it's related. When you and I did the Hogan's wrestling, heroes, the
Rock and Wrestling.
God help me. Yeah, when we did that, yeah, that was a similar feeling. Like, hey, this is a great idea on paper until we start watching it and go, oh dear.
Why is Roddy Piper not on the poster for this movie? Dirk Benedict is and Piper
Perhaps
isn't?
by Roddy Piper's request, Michael.
Oh,
there's a good chance.
Could be. It's weird. It's Dirk Benedict.
Crazy.
He gets third billing. I thought he was the star of the movie.
Again, if I was a betting man, I'd say Piper said, "Don't you dare put me on the cover of this."
And we got to take a few minutes today to talk about They Live.
Yes,
his Hollywood movie opus.
Arguably the greatest film ever made.
It was a fun movie when I first saw it. I didn't even realize he was in it. And I was a big Piper fan at that point. It broke my heart when he retired in 87. I thought, as a kid, I'm thinking, oh, it really is forever. We'll never see Roddy Piper again. And then I remember seeing the poster at Jumbo Video in Kitchener for They Live. And I swear I didn't know. Look at that. I didn't know that was Roddy Piper. I just saw the poster up at Jumbo Video and it said They Live. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. And I didn't rent it right away. It took a while. And then when I finally rented it, what? Roddy Piper is in this? Because they never mentioned it on WWF.
He wasn't there?
He was gone filming this movie.
On their TV, so there was no
But you would think they'd bring it up, like our old friend Roddy did a movie. Never heard about it.
No money in it for them if they do that. I mean,
that really sucks.
Wasn't there making a money? There was no ticket to sell with Roddy Piper on the billing, so there was probably just no reason to.
When Roddy would come off as didn't trust the promoter, DTA, he was justified because like when Batista went off to make a movie, even if there was no guarantee he'd ever come back, oh, Batista's in this and Batista's in that, and The Rock is doing Scorpion King and this and that. But Piper, it was almost like go and fail and come crawling back. They did not want to encourage his Hollywood career. And then when he went and made a great movie, they still never ever mentioned it. But fantastic movie. He's awesome in it. And it went from being like a fairly fun movie at the time. I watched it as a young guy and I was like, that's pretty darn fun. So it went from a pretty fun movie to an actual, like one of Carpenter's great movies. It's not better than The Thing, but I'd say it's up there with Escape from New York.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not so big I'm not well versed in all John Carpenter's films, and it's been a minute since I've seen They Live. I watched it in 2020. My pandemic roommate and I in New York City. It was one of the movies we watched. We had like a weekly movie night, and this was one of them because it was one that neither of us had seen since we were kids. Roddy Piper, and correct me, I'm sure you know this film better than I do. Is he not pretty much in just about every scene? I mean, this is his movie A to Z.
Oh
right?
Yeah. He's definitely the star. He's all over the movie. Not in every single scene. They cut to the villains every once in a while, but it might seem like it's Piper and Keith David, and they have like one of the longest fight scenes in movie history. And that was all Roddy. It's like, and if we do this, and if we do that, and
oh my God.
But
you can see, I mean, years later in '96, Piper and Goldust have an absurdly long and brutal fight by the Gold Cadillac before stock footage took over. I'm not gonna.
This is why I'm wearing these. Put on the glasses.
Oh,
these are actually not as dark. They're not as dark as they look on camera. I keep saying this. They're slightly tinted. If that light hits them right. But put on the glasses. I keep them on so that I can see the truth.
Is there merchandise with just They Live glasses? I'm sure you can buy those somewhere.
You would think there would be. They've made this awesome figure not too long ago though.
Yeah.
I think they just reissued it. The Nada Roddy Piper Nada figure. I was really surprised to see this one because it's an R-rated movie. It's pretty violent, and there it is in a WWE wrestling figure box. It's an actual WWE wrestling figure, but it's
it is WWE.
Yeah, the graphics from They Live are all over it. It says They Live, not like it's an officially licensed They Live figure, but
It's not made by like Mattel though, or
it is Mattel. Yeah,
it is Mattel. Okay.
Yeah, Mattel did a small line of wrestling figures. It wasn't just Roddy, because you know how they are. They'd never do anything just for Roddy. But they had a small line of like Hollywood wrestler figures.
Okay.
So in the initial line, it was Roddy from They Live, The Rock from something.
Andre and Honeycombs commercial.
I wish.
No, I'm
was
sorry.
it John Cena from Fast and Furious, maybe? So yeah, like it was like this wrestler was in this and this wrestler was in that. Didn't really matter. But Roddy Piper and They Live, like, oh my God, we've been waiting decades for this. So that was the really special one of the line.
And you have an amazing collection of Piper figures in front of you as well. And this guy wasn't going to get it. So before we were on air, I was showing off. I love this guy. This is the Mattel. It's like a He-Man style or Motu style Piper, but it's not. There's the
Superstars, right? That's what they call them.
There's I think so. Yeah, it's the crossover.
Which is, you know who you can thank for that name? Superstar Billy Graham, brother.
Yeah. But I love these, and that is all. I just want to say I love this toy.
Yeah. Let's go through a few more here since
you got that takes me back to my youth, the Hasbro you just had a second ago. That was Hasbro
90, 91, the
Piper Punch.
Yeah, the Piper Punch, and I've got one of the Wrestling Figure Workshop belts on him.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Intercontinental title belt to commemorate that 2-month period. Everyone knows this one. All the old schoolers know. Yeah.
Sure. All the big rubber guys.
Oh, the most hated. I didn't buy this one when I was a kid because, like, why would I? He's such a dastardly villain. But now he's one of my favorite LJN figures. And, he can take the kilt off and spin it around. And
do you have the smaller rubber ones where you put your thumb up their butts?
No.
Okay.
Well, I got a Hogan and a Hillbilly Jim, but not a Roddy. That would actually be kind of cool to get a thumb wrestler Roddy Piper. And that was some of his heat when I was a kid too. Everyone calling it a skirt. It's a skirt. It was a different time. That was not as it was a different thing to be walking around even in a kilt. Like it was officially a kilt.
Right.
And so, but that goes back to that whole thing of like, he's wearing a skirt, but he had a point. It was a kilt. It's part of his Scottish culture. It was actually wrong to mock him for embracing his culture. So that's again why the face turn was actually not that hard, because like we were wrong. Everyone who mocked him for wearing a skirt, even Hogan in his skirt, Piper with your skirt, we were all wrong. Like it's an actual Scottish kilt.
We were wrong, and not too much longer. Oh, that's beautiful. That's so Mania 8.
Mania 8, yeah.
That's not too much longer. Well, around the Mania 8 time, oddly enough, is now if a heel, if a Mr. Perfect or a Rick Martel or whoever says skirt, now they're gonna get it.
Yep.
Oh, Ric Flair said skirt. Oh, he's gonna get it. Mr. Perfect, etc., etc.
Now Mattel just did this one not too long ago, retro style. So this is Roddy Piper WrestleMania 1 era, and he comes with a removable kilt. So I always used to love how he would swing that kilt around. So I've actually got him holding the kilt, and he's doing the one-legged because that's the Piper hop, right? So that's
beautiful.
I got that one. And then we got to also mention Roddy Piper was an Iron Grenadier. He got a G.I. Joe figure.
Is that the 4-inch G.I. Joe?
No, it isn't. This is a custom because the official one is way too expensive these days.
Oh, yeah, it's a nightmare. Yeah.
So I got one of the Build and Brawl 4-inch figures that came out a long time ago, back when it was still the WWF. And I've done them up with some Marauder Gunrunner custom outfit. So he basically looks like El Duce with like a lot of knives and a lot of pistulas and a little custom kilt there, just a piece of ribbon.
He is intense.
Just and I've got him with my Iron Grenadiers because I think Roddy Piper not as a G.I. Joe, but as an Iron Grenadier, that's just as perfect a match as Sergeant Slaughter as a G.I. Joe was.
Yeah, I love it.
And that's a much cheaper alternative to the official Iron Grenadier Piper, which is hundreds of dollars now. It was a convention exclusive. It was never widely released.
Right, I've seen that on a lot. That's always one that catches my eye whenever I'm scrolling around with that stuff. I always stop and then I look at that number and I just keep on scrolling. But I do stop and give it a look every time. I'm like, that's just to admire that. I'd actually feel, because I take everything off out of the package, but that would be one where I'm like, I'd probably keep them in just because of the whole.
Yeah, and I
don't own it.
I like the head sculpt on the Build and Brawl better than the official GI Joe. I don't know why this won't.
Okay, yeah, he's a little
focus. It's a little more Roddy. He's got the sly smile.
Yeah.
It looks a little more like Hot Rod.
I'm glad I definitely want to mention this. One of the loudest Roddy Piper pops, I guess. And when you're an attraction, one of the best things about an attraction is the out of nowhere, the return. Not just Andre, Brock Lesnar, Sid, honestly, Sid Vicious, Psycho Sid, whatever, is one where when that music hits and it's been a year, or Kane is one where you just go, oh my God, you're all in trouble now. One of the best, loudest reactions was the 92 Rumble, and this is so rare. It's the second time we've seen him that night. In the middle of that match, we always think of Ric Flair and his performance in that match, and as what we should. But Roddy Piper's reaction when Flair was left alone to his own devices and he got rid of the boss man, Flair thinks he has a breather and he's out of the woods for a moment and no more danger can come to him. And there's Roddy Piper. And I remember the arms outstretched. Like you have no idea.
And Gorilla goes, Roddy!
It's almost like Piper is saying, and he's running with his arms out like he's just like running through a field, happy as can be, because he has a half-beaten Flair he can just wail on, and he's just like a kid on a playground, and the people are losing their minds, and it's rare that someone gets so huge a pop when you've seen them already that night.
Yeah, he won the title. He already got a big pop.
He got two, and it was a good talking point for the announcers. We knew Piper almost definitely wasn't winning the big one, but it's a talking point for announcers. Hey, no one's had this opportunity before to win two of them. I actually
thought he was going to win that whole. It sounded like this is my last shot. This is my last shot, and I thought he's going to do it as a thank you run. I thought like they're going to give Piper both belts as a thank you for everything he's done. At the time, I didn't realize, what Piper realized. Never gonna happen. No. Never gonna happen.
You can't have a babyface having both belts going into Mania too.
We need
a chase.
That's before I understood the concept of booking, and I was more of a fan than behind the scenes.
I was 12. I was 11.
I was also convinced Hogan was going to beat Warrior for the Intercontinental title so that Hogan could be the ultimate, have both belts at the same time because Hogan is Hogan. And then I realized after, that wouldn't have made any sense.
If I may, we're trailing off, but I thought Warrior was going to lose, even though I wanted Warrior to win. My brain had been trained to think Hulk Hogan always wins, even though I wanted Warrior to.
Same here.
So, but WrestleMania 6, in essence, maybe not Piper's shining moment.
I saw a stand-up piece from him just today as I was going through some stuff on YouTube, and some of his stand-up is on there. And it's, like you said, not really stand-up. He's telling stories.
Yeah.
But he's telling them like a stand-up comedian. Like he's got the rhythm. He's got the delivery. He's got the emotion. It's great. It's just great.
The crowd control he had that night when people are just yelling stuff out and he's shutting one down and taking another, and here it was amazing. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. What were we? I just lost it. What were we talking about?
You're looking at someone. Mania 6 was a story.
Right. So as he's talking about the stories, he's taking shots at everyone, right? But in a funny way, not in a malicious way, but in a funny way, like, Flair, it all comes back to that guy. Right, like that, playful. But he brings up WrestleMania 6, and when he remembers, he's like, oh, I don't want to get into that. Just like a quick, oh no, like it's not something that not one of my shining moments,
Right.
So when people try to dig that up and go, oh my God, what the hell was he thinking? I mean, Roddy was right up there on stage with a microphone going, yeah, what the hell was I thinking?
Yeah.
How can you put the boots to the guy for something that he goes, well, that was a misfire.
He wasn't thinking. I mean,
Yeah.
that was a time where stars still get creative freedom, but stars like him got a lot of creative freedom. And you give people too much rope sometimes, and they're going to hang themselves with it. And that was a case of a big star was given a lot of rope, and it was too much. And someone should have stepped in. But when the same way with people want to say goodbye to, they don't want to say no to Roddy, they want to say no to Andre or Hulk or whatever. But you live and learn. If you recall at the time, Vince McMahon couldn't have been more than 40 years old, 40 something, early mid 40s. Piper would have been 36, 35, 30 at the time.
Yeah.
So really, we're all just dudes going, I don't know.
And also, like,
not publicly traded yet.
And plus not malicious. His intent was unifying, to bring together. And it's like this thing going around these days where when you incorporate something or have something that's not of your culture, this still blows my mind. Like this term they've invented, cultural appropriation,
which people do to me as a Bob, which I don't like.
This is a completely insane term. Like, so you're not allowed to. I grew up on wrestling, of wrestlers taking things from other cultures in honor of those cultures. The Ultimate Warrior has a bunch of native motifs in honor of native warriors. It's not to mock, or it's not like stolen valor or anything like that. It's to honor. So when Piper did that, it wasn't to mock or anything. It was to say we are together. We are the same, and I do this in honor of you. But you've got those people who are looking for something to be furious about.
That's true.
And they see blackface and they go, blackface is blackface. But like, you got to know the man. I'm going to tell another little story about Roddy Piper that he shared on a shoot interview. We haven't really touched into the really rough upbringing he had. He told a story of, he was with a little girl. He was like 6 years old, and he's talking about some of the abuse he went through as a kid. And so he was playing with this little girl, and something happened. Their clothes got all wet. So they went into like a barn or something, because they thought they were going to get in lots of trouble with their parents if they came home soaking wet. So they thought, let's just hang up our clothes. These are children, 6 years old. Piper had barely any memory of this, but he remembered for one particular reason. So they hung their clothes up so that they would dry and they could get dressed and go home, these little children. And the girl's mother came in, saw them naked, and, assumed Piper was up to no good. This is a 6-year-old child. And Piper, the way he delivers it, you have to hear it, because Piper, as an old man, was still broken up about this. He was, as he's telling the story, he says, we're kids. We're so innocent. We're children. We're so innocent. And the way he's telling it, it's like, what kind of woman would come in? We're children, nothing. But he tells a story, and his dad was a cop, and his dad was the cop for the area. And so when his dad found out what Piper was allegedly up to, a 6-year-old child, that didn't cross his mind, his dad wore him out. So that's one of his early memories of like that. Nothing happened. It was innocent. We were just trying to dry our clothes and not get into trouble. And that was the recurring theme for Roddy in his younger years, which is why he ran away from home when he was 13, because he just kept getting beaten and beaten and beaten. That's another reason, I'm such a fan of Roddy Piper. Yes, there's the entertaining aspect of him, but there's also the fighter. And he always called himself a fighter. He didn't call himself a wrestler usually. He'd say, I'm a fighter. And I remember when he was doing the retirement in 87 against Adrian Adonis, he would do these little promos like we go through on Greatest Wrestling Promos, and he would say, "I got 4 fights left." Like that's how he would talk about his matches, right? I got 3 fights left, and I'm gonna see you in Boston in the Boston Garden. He didn't call them wrestling matches; he called them fights. He was such a fighter, and he opened up about it in his later years, and he was still so torn up about it. Like you could tell there was some serious emotional damage that he had buried deep, and he just fought. He fought for like 50 years. Another story that he shared when he was in school in Toronto, he was supposed to go swimming, and I think he's like 13 at this point. And he was saying like what the kids do is like they would make you get naked to go swim in the pool. And Roddy didn't want to, just already abused so much growing up. And he's like, he had learned to say, no thanks. And so he said he got cornered. And these grown adult men cornered him and said, that he had to get naked to go swimming. And so it's so awful to hear about abuse when that happens. And Piper's reaction to that is what I wish every child in that situation would do. He pulled a knife because like you're too small to fight them off. Right. So he pulled out an equalizer and they kicked him out of school. They said, well, you're out of here. Well, good. Cause that's not a school that he or any kid should have been in, but that was it. So when he talked about running away from home, it's nice that in his later years, he was able to share what exactly went on. He wasn't just a troubled child. I mean, there were situations like that happening where he said, no, I'm not going to be abused. And that's what I also, when I think of Roddy Piper, not just the entertainer, but I think of the man who said he will not be disrespected. And to me, Roddy Piper is a shining example of a man who says, don't disrespect me, because, he's going to stand up for himself. And I got to share my not personal story, but it was pretty close, pretty close to home. I did get to see Roddy Piper wrestle one time at the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium. He wrestled Earthquake.
Okay.
And I don't think that match exists anywhere on tape. Probably a lot of people don't even realize that ever even occurred. But it happened in the Kitchener Memorial Auditorium in 1990, I believe. I made 2 signs when I went there with my mom to watch wrestling. I made a Bret Hart sign, which Bret wasn't Bret back then. He was part of the Hart Foundation, but he was one of my favorites. So I made a Bret Hart sign and I made a Roddy Piper sign. And Roddy Piper spent almost the whole match on Earthquake's back. Yeah. So kind of like the way he would work Andre. Roddy was a big deal by that point in 1990. He didn't have to do that. He could have eaten Earthquake up, but he knew that doesn't make any sense. This guy's special. Look at him. Right. So instead of just eating him up or going toe to toe and looking like looking like the valiant hero, he spent the whole match on Earthquake's back. And I don't remember much about that night at all, but I remember he's really like just piggybacking. He's trying to put Earthquake out. He's pounding on him and trying to sleeper hold him. And he just looked like Piper wasn't a little guy. Like you saw him, right? Face to face.
Well, I mean, by the time I met him,
close to 6 foot, right?
Actually, no.
Really?
By the time I met him, that's the thing. He was probably 5'10", because I'm 5'10". I'm 5'11" if I'm really, really standing up straight. And he was shorter. I mean, this is 2010. Give me a second here. He'd be over 50. I think he would have been 70 today, so we're doing a math here. So 56, 57 years old, but beaten up, hip surgeries. So I did not meet that Roddy Piper.
Too many pile drivers from Paul.
You have to understand, I didn't meet the same.
But anyway, he spent the whole match on Earthquake's back. I don't remember the finish, but I remember he bolted for the door. I remember after the Bret was in the main event. Oddly enough, you'd think Piper Earthquake would be the main event, but it was Bret and Jim in the main event. And the lights came up, and Jim already went to the back, and Bret was going on all 4 corners like he would eventually do, right? And I thought, wow, like Bret is so cool. Like the opponents, even his partner, are like, let's get out of Kitchener. Where is Kitchener? Let's get out of here. And Bret is like, the lights are up and he's still like showing the tag belt to the fans. And he saw my sign. I'm like, whoa, holy smokes, Bret Hart saw my sign. But Piper was like, everybody, he took off. He's like, we got to get to Toronto. And I didn't fault him for it. It's like, yeah, it was just awesome to see Roddy Piper in person. But the story that I like to tell, and I probably told you this before, is that there was a guy who was filming an indie movie in a small town in Ontario, and a small little indie film. And, you know, he was working with Roddy Piper, and he said after shooting, Piper told him, where's the hospital? Asked him, where's the hospital? And the director's like, why, are you okay? And Piper's like, yeah, it's fine. I go visit the children, the sick children. Where's the hospital? So this isn't even like a giant city with a big sick children's hospital. It's a small town, and he's going to a small town hospital to go visit sick kids, because after a long day of filming, like after filming, you're tired, you want to go lay down, especially with all the injuries he must have accumulated and the drive probably. And
yeah, he's not feeling good.
And he's going to visit sick children. And that to me is another reason why I'm such a huge Piper fan, because not just a great wrestler and a promo and an entertainer, but always giving everything of himself, giving till it hurts and giving some more. And there was never any publicity for that. You know, it wasn't in the paper. Roddy Piper goes to visit.
No cameras is the biggest thing.
No cameras, no documentary, no YouTube channel, no Twitter, no Instagram, no selfie in front of the hospital. No one would have known. I never would have known if the actual director of the movie hadn't told me, hey, do you want to hear a cool Roddy Piper story? And first of all, I'm like, how the hell did you get Roddy Piper? How'd you get Roddy Piper to be in your movie? It's like, well, we got him. You know, he was doing the little indie movies in the 2000s, so you could get him. But this director was like, you'll never hear this anywhere, but this is what this guy did after we were done filming. It's like, he didn't go to the bar, which sometimes he would, you know, king of the frat house. But in this particular case, the city that I don't think he had any real connection to in Ontario, that's Roddy Piper. He's Roddy Piper and we're not.
That's right. I'm glad you shared that. I'll throw in really quick. The first wrestling event I ever went to, my mom took me as well. Again, we were suburban New York, right above. Yes, that's correct. Thanks for joining us. My mother was on the radio trying to win, I think, a lobster dinner, and she won second place, which was tickets to wrestling at Madison Square Garden. In October of 91, her 11-year-old son was a huge wrestling fan, so she ended up taking the tickets that she wasn't trying to win, and begrudgingly, on what I think was a Monday night, I would have been in the 5th grade, took me to Madison Square Garden, and the main event, which is on the Peacock network or whatever your WWE network is, October of 1991, the first wrestling match I ever saw, a wrestling show, was main evented by Roddy Piper versus Ric Flair at Madison Square Garden. The first match, I watched it today, the first wrestling show I ever saw was Piper and Flair in the Garden.
Whoa.
And
you peaked right out of the gate
early, and then from there, oof. Because 2 years later, it was a 5-hour taping, and
then it was Repo Man versus PL Hopper.
I saw some serious Quang. I saw some Quang, man.
Quang.
I saw a lot of Quang.
Quang versus Bob Backlund.
I saw Quang and Adam Bomb. I saw Adam Bomb and Joe DeVito. I saw some Adam Bomb and I saw some Quang 2 years later. But that was my first. The LOD beat the Natural Disasters in the last match, but the build main event was Piper and Flair in the Garden, which I find out later. I'm pretty sure that was Flair's first MSG match as well, oddly enough. But again, Piper got pinned. It's amazing how many Piper losses we've talked about. There was brass knuckles and feet on the ropes involved with Ric Flair, putting his feet on the ropes from a lateral press, which should actually make your opponent have an easier time kicking out. Wrestling logic, we'll move past it. Bobby Heenan at ringside, Gorilla and Lord Alfred on commentary. Piper and Flair, 11-year-old Bob, don't even bother looking for me. I can't find me. I couldn't tell you. It doesn't matter. But if you see that match, Ric Flair is wearing black trunks. It's probably an easier YouTube search than it is a Peacock search because that takes 18 days with a few ads from State Farm Insurance. But there's an 11-year-old Bob Hansen in that Piper Flair MSG match somewhere in that building.
That's a great match. And that was Roddy. I mean, Flair was coming in. So, yeah, a lot of people knew him, but a lot of people didn't know him, had never seen him before. And that was Roddy going, we need to establish this guy quickly. And so you're not going to feed Hogan to Flair. You got to build up to that. So who can we put against Flair to build him quickly? Yeah, it was Roddy doing a favor for his friend, and he would do it for guys that he knew wouldn't railroad him, wouldn't screw him over. Roddy had a very don't trust anybody attitude, but he actually did trust a few guys.
Yeah.
Especially Sergeant Slaughter. I got to bring that up. So, as the story goes, Roddy only ever let one wrestler in his home, and it wasn't Ric Flair. It was Sergeant Slaughter, and I've heard that it went both ways too. Sarge only let one wrestler in his house, and it was Uncle Rod. So the two of them, they were very close as well.
That's awesome. I'm glad you shared the story of the hospital and independent wrestling. It was we told all the people we can tell. Now we know Piper about buying pizza for an audience. We know about him visiting all the sick kids. We know what we know, and I'm glad we can spread the word.
And I think that's a good spot to sign off. So I'm going to cue up the bagpipes. Where are them bagpipes at?
All right. Well, I'm going to go kick bubblegum and chew ass. Wait, what?
And we're all out of what? Well, Bob, thanks so much for hanging out tonight and talking.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me squeeze that in.
Fantastic. Jake, good to see you. Coming in for the late run and arguably the best Roddy Piper tribute show ever. You could argue that.
Thank you, Jake. It's an argument to be made.
Thank you all for hanging out with us tonight. But most importantly, I'm going to try not to get choked up here. Thank you, Roddy Piper. Hot Rod, thank you. Love you. Wherever you are, see you someday. Thanks, everyone. Nerdmas Day.
Let's get rowdy.